You think African American breakfasts were just grits and eggs? Think again. Black kitchens across the South created morning meals that carried strength, tradition, and soul through generations before quietly slipping from our tables. Let's dig into 60 African American breakfasts no one makes anymore. Sorghum syrup on hot biscuits was a rural breakfast tradition rooted in the fields and farms where sorghum was grown and milled long before maple syrup ever became common. The syrup was thick, earthy, and rich, with a sweetness that felt deeper than sugar. Grandparents would split open hot biscuits, steam rising, and drizzle sorghum across the soft center until it glistened. The flavor was bold and comforting, slightly smoky, and entirely unique. It tasted like the land itself, like seasons of harvest and the steady work of hands that knew how to make every ingredient count. Biscuits with sorghum were inexpensive, filling, and quietly indulgent in their own rustic way. Families loved them because the syrup lasted long, cost little, and carried the taste of home. Even today, those who grew up with sorghum syrup remember its distinct sweetness with a kind of affection that never fades. Poached eggs on toast were breakfast elegance in a world that rarely had time for it. Water simmered just below boiling, and eggs were lowered gently, their whites curling around the yolks like soft silk. When lifted out and set on buttered toast, they gleamed, tender, trembling, and perfect. A sprinkle of salt and pepper was all it needed. It was a dish that made even a modest kitchen feel refined. The first cut of the knife released a golden stream that soaked into the bread, rich and warm. This breakfast carried a sense of calm, the quiet kind that came before a day's labor. Grandparents who made poached eggs treated it like a ritual, never rushed, always patient. It was proof that even in lean times, beauty could live on the breakfast plate. Poached eggs on toast weren't about luxury. They were about intention, about giving the morning the dignity it deserved. Gravy over rice was a breakfast swap that kept families fed when biscuits were too costly to make. Flour and fat gravy, seasoned with salt and pepper, was ladled over reheated rice to create a filling dish that stretched leftovers. It was hearty and sustaining, turning a side dish into the centerpiece of the morning meal. Families leaned on it because it required almost nothing extra, just the ability to stretch one meal into another. The flavor was simple, but it provided comfort, especially when eaten hot after cold nights. Children often carried bowls to the table with anticipation, while adults saw it as another way to avoid waste. Gravy over rice became a memory tied to thrift and practicality, proving that creativity was just as essential as ingredients during lean years. It was a dish that sustained both body and spirit, a reminder of how households carried themselves through difficult times with resourcefulness. Gravy over rice was survival turned into comfort food. Homemade biscuits with cane syrup were a breakfast of pride, born from hands that worked and loved without rest. Grandparents woke early, sifting flour, cutting in lard, and rolling out dough on wooden tables dusted with years of memory. The smell of baking filled the house, the warmth spilling into every room. When the biscuits came out, golden and steaming, the cane syrup waited nearby, thick and dark as molasses. It poured slow, catching the morning light like honey turned to amber. The sweetness mixed with the salt of the biscuit, creating comfort too deep to describe. It was the kind of meal that made you pause before the first bite, because it tasted like home. Every batch told a story, of mothers who made do, of children who grew up strong on simplicity. There was joy in its repetition, in the rhythm of making something real from so little. The meal said, "We might not have much, but we have each other." And that was enough. The sound of the oven door closing, the clink of a butter knife, the hush that followed the first bite, all of it became part of the morning ritual. That biscuit, soft on the inside and crisp at the edge, carried warmth that lasted long after breakfast ended. It was the taste of love baked daily, patient and proud. Pork neck bone and rice turned a humble cut into a deeply flavored breakfast that spoke to generations of resourceful cooking. Meaty pork neck bones were simmered slowly with onions, garlic, and bay leaves until their rich broth infused every grain of rice. The long cooking released tenderness and flavor, transforming inexpensive ingredients into a dish that tasted luxurious. Families often added a pinch of red pepper or a splash of vinegar for brightness, while some stirred in greens for added nourishment. Served steaming hot, pork neck bone and rice offered hearty protein and comforting warmth that fueled long workdays. This meal reflected the African-American tradition of using every part of the animal with skill and respect, proving that nothing needed to be wasted to create something memorable. Pork neck bone and rice stood as both sustenance and celebration, a bowl of savory history that reminded everyone at the table of the creativity and strength passed down through kitchens across the South and beyond. Baked cheese grits casserole prepared the night before allowed grandmothers to focus on Thanksgiving dinner while breakfast took care of itself. Cooked grits were mixed with eggs, sharp cheddar cheese, butter, and milk, then poured into baking dishes and refrigerated overnight. Thanksgiving morning, the casserole baked until set and golden, filling kitchens with savory aromas. This breakfast could feed large groups with minimal morning effort. The eggs and cheese provided protein while the grits delivered comforting carbohydrates. Families cut squares and served them hot, sometimes with hot sauce. The casserole represented forward-thinking meal planning. It could be prepared when time allowed, then baked when needed. Children loved the cheesy richness while adults appreciated the practicality. Baked cheese grits casserole proved planning ahead created stress-free Thanksgiving mornings. Stewed apples with cinnamon and lard were the warmth of winter mornings in the South. Grandparents would peel the apples by hand, their fingers quick and sure, tossing each slice into an iron pot that hissed when the fat hit the heat. A spoonful of lard went first. There was no butter to spare, melting into a glossy pool that would coat every piece of fruit. Sugar was added if there was any to be found, but most times the sweetness came from the apples themselves, coaxed out by patience and low flame. Cinnamon or nutmeg, if there was some hidden in the back of the cupboard, turned the smell into something magical. The apples softened slowly, curling into tender ribbons that glowed like amber. The air filled with a warmth that made even the poorest kitchen feel rich. Served over biscuits or eaten plain from a bowl, it was the kind of meal that made children quiet with joy. It cost almost nothing but felt like everything. Grandparents said it was food for the soul, and they were right. It soothed hunger, calmed hearts, and brought everyone closer to the table. Even when times were lean, stewed apples with lard reminded families that comfort could be made from what was already there. It wasn't just breakfast, it was love made visible through steam and sugar. Hop and John morning bowl carried the luck and legacy of the South into every spoonful, blending black-eyed peas, fluffy rice, and smoky bacon for a meal steeped in tradition. Peas were simmered until tender with onions, garlic, and a hint of pork, then spooned over freshly cooked rice so the savory juices soaked into every grain. A sprinkle of green onions or a splash of pepper vinegar added brightness, while some cooks stirred in diced peppers for extra color and flavor. This dish had long been served on New Year's Day for prosperity, but in the 1970s, many African-American families enjoyed it year-round as a hearty breakfast. It offered protein, fiber, and deep flavor that sustained workers and school children alike. Hop and John morning bowl reminded each generation of the history carried in its ingredients, from West African roots to Southern kitchens, proving that food could nourish both body and spirit while keeping cultural memory alive with every bite of smoky, satisfying goodness. Fried chicken neck with biscuits was another way families made use of overlooked cuts of poultry. Necks were cheap, flavorful, and could be fried crisp, then served alongside fresh biscuits for a sustaining breakfast. The meat was small but savory, and paired with biscuits, it created a meal that felt hearty despite its thrift. Families appreciated it because it ensured that no part of the bird was wasted, stretching poultry into multiple meals. Children remembered picking the meat from the bones, while adults valued the fat and flavor that carried into the biscuits. Fried chicken neck with biscuits was more than just food. It was an expression of resourcefulness. It provided both protein and comfort, fueling families for demanding days of work or marches. This dish symbolized resilience, showing how households turned scraps into sustenance without losing pride. Fried chicken neck with biscuits was a taste of perseverance, remembered as one of the breakfasts that carried people through struggle. Cornbread and buttermilk in a bowl was breakfast in its purest, humblest form. Yesterday's cornbread, crumbled and covered with cold buttermilk, became something both refreshing and filling. The texture was soft yet hearty, the tang of buttermilk cutting through the sweetness of the corn. It was eaten straight from the bowl, sometimes with a spoon, sometimes with a piece of bread to scoop it up. To some, it was comfort food. To others, it was necessity. But for everyone who grew up with it, it was memory of grandparents who never wasted a crumb and knew how to make even the plainest food taste right. It was a dish that belonged to no one and everyone at once, simple enough to make but impossible to forget. Cornbread and buttermilk was proof that contentment could live in a single bowl. Coffee milk for kids was one of those small morning rituals that made children feel grown, even though the drink was mostly warm milk with only a tiny splash of coffee. Parents and grandparents mixed it carefully, just enough coffee to tint the milk a light tan and add the faintest whisper of that roasted smell adults relied on to start their day. It was soothing, warm, and familiar. The kind of drink that made sleepy children perk up before school without giving them the full strength of adult coffee. Many African American households use this as a way to include children in the morning rhythm, letting them feel part of the adult world while still keeping things gentle. The taste was mild and slightly sweet, especially when a bit of sugar was added, and it had a comforting creaminess that stuck with you long after the cup was empty. The mornings felt quieter back then, slower, filled with the soft sounds of spoons stirring and radios humming low in the background. Coffee milk was not just a drink, it was a moment, a shared start to the day that made you feel loved and included. Even now, the memory of that warm cup brings people back to kitchens filled with steam, conversation, and the steady comfort of family. Fried fatback with biscuits was the kind of breakfast that came from deep tradition, from years when every part of the animal was used and nothing was taken for granted. Before bacon became the breakfast standard, fatback was the salty, sizzling star of the morning. Grandparents sliced it thick and fried it until the edges crisped and curled, releasing a savory aroma that filled the whole house. The drippings soaked into fresh biscuits, turning them into something rich and flavorful without needing butter or gravy. The combination was simple but powerful. A pairing that carried families through long days of labor, and school fatback was inexpensive, accessible, and packed with flavor, which made it a natural choice for rural homes and city kitchens alike. Children grew up associating that salty crunch with mornings spent around crowded tables, hands reaching for biscuits still warm from the oven. Even though fatback is rarely seen in modern breakfast routines, the memory of it remains strong for those who grew up with its bold taste. It represents a time when meals came from resourcefulness, from tradition, and from knowing how to make the most of what you had. Fried potatoes and onions, or home fries as many called them, were the true breakfast of yesterday's leftovers. Cold potatoes from dinner were sliced thin and tossed in a skillet with sizzling butter or lard. Onions followed, their sweetness blooming as they browned. The two cooked together until the edges crisped and the smell filled the kitchen with comfort. Salt, pepper, maybe a pinch of paprika. That was all they needed. Each forkful was smoky and soft, full of the flavor that only time and care could give. It was food for early risers and late sleepers alike, eaten from chipped plates at wooden tables. Home fries were the definition of resourcefulness. Nothing wasted, everything transformed. Served with eggs or just on their own, they carried the quiet satisfaction of a meal made from yesterday's effort. In the hum of the morning, that skillet was both memory and promise. Rye coffee substitute with toast was born out of scarcity, but it carried warmth into countless mornings. Coffee beans were expensive and often hard to find, so roasted rye grains were brewed instead, producing a hot, bitter drink that resembled coffee. Families paired it with toast made from whatever bread was available, sometimes stale but still sustaining. The ritual of drinking a hot beverage in the morning mattered as much as the food itself, offering comfort before facing long days of uncertainty. Adults leaned on this substitute to keep their routines intact, finding strength in familiarity even without the real thing. Toast added bulk, and sometimes apple butter or syrup was spread on top if there was any to spare. Rye coffee substitute with toast reflected the creativity of families who refused to give up small comforts despite financial strain. It carried both warmth and resolve, fueling people with more than calories. It gave them routine and stability. Blackstrap molasses porridge was strong, bitter, and full of life. Grandparents stirred it thick over a slow flame, blending cornmeal, milk, and a spoonful of molasses until it darkened like caramel. The taste was deep, sweet with a bite of iron, a tonic for tired bones and empty cupboards. It was the kind of breakfast that gave strength more than comfort, a reminder that food could heal as much as it could fill. The steam rose slow and sweet, wrapping the room in the scent of perseverance. Each spoonful was medicine disguised as sustenance, a ritual that kept hearts and hands working through the hardest mornings. Some mornings it was thinned with water, other times thick enough to hold a spoon upright. Grandparents ate it quietly, knowing it would carry them through the day. It was survival served in a bowl, humble but powerful, like endurance made edible. Red-eye ham and coffee gravy provided a bold, bracing start to the morning with a flavor that lingered long after breakfast was done. Thick slices of country-cured ham were seared in a heavy skillet until their edges browned and their fat rendered into a savory base. Into that sizzling pan went black coffee, which deglazed the salty bits and created a thin, smoky gravy. The sharp bitterness of coffee balanced the ham's rich saltiness, producing a sauce both surprising and addictive. Poured over warm biscuits or spooned onto grits, the gravy soaked in and carried a gentle caffeine kick that woke up the senses. Families across the South prized this dish for its simplicity and strength, a reminder of farm mornings when nothing went to waste. Red-eye ham and coffee gravy reflected the ingenuity of African-American cooks who transformed pantry basics into something unforgettable. A breakfast that spoke of resilience and tradition with every deep, savory bite. Fried apple hand pies made from dough scraps turned yesterday's pie making into today's breakfast feast. After preparing pies for dinner, grandmother saved every scrap of dough, rolling them thin and filling them with spiced apples cooked down with sugar and cinnamon. The small pockets were sealed tight, then fried in hot lard until golden brown and crispy outside while the filling bubbled inside. Children woke to the smell of frying dough and sweet apples. These hand pies were portable, perfect for eating while helping with preparations. The cost was nearly nothing since they used scraps that would otherwise be discarded, proving waste not wisdom. Families made dozens, stacking them on plates covered with towels to stay warm. Adults paired them with strong black coffee while children drank milk. Fried apple hand pies weren't about elegance, but making joy from leftovers. They represented creativity that turned scarcity into celebration. Sweet potato biscuits brought natural sweetness and a warm orange glow to breakfast plates, showcasing a root vegetable long cherished in African-American kitchens. Mashed cooked sweet potatoes were folded into a dough of flour, butter, and a touch of milk, creating a dough that baked into soft, tender biscuits. The sweet potatoes added moisture and a gentle earthy flavor, while a hint of cinnamon or nutmeg provided subtle spice. As they baked, the biscuits released a fragrant aroma that signaled a special morning treat. Families served them warm with butter, honey, or cane syrup, turning a simple biscuit into a celebration of the harvest. Sweet potato biscuits captured the creativity of home cooks who used seasonal produce to enrich everyday meals, blending tradition with a touch of sweetness. Their bright color and comforting taste made them a favorite for children and adults alike, proving that wholesome ingredients could create a breakfast that was both nourishing and delightfully indulgent. Smoked herring and rice was the ocean's gift to the Southern kitchen. The herring came salted and cured, strong enough to scent the air even before cooking. Grandparents soaked it first, softening its bite, then fried it in a pan until the edges curled and crisped. The fish went over hot rice, its smoky oil dripping down like seasoning. The meal was bold, salty, rich, and unforgettable. For those who lived near the coast, it was a taste of home and history, connecting generations through flavor. The smell might have been sharp, but it spoke of sustenance and pride. Smoked herring and rice was food that filled the stomach and lingered on the soul. It reminded everyone that humble ingredients could build mighty traditions. Every plate told the same story of struggle, resourcefulness, and the sea's generosity, carried into the kitchen with faith and fire. The salt of the fish met the warmth of the rice in perfect rhythm, a balance of sea and soil. Sometimes a splash of hot sauce or a side of cornbread completed the plate, making something humble feel whole. Even long after breakfast was done, the scent stayed, a memory of mornings when families found strength in what they had and gratitude in what they shared. Cabbage and egg scramble was one of those quick, no-fuss breakfasts that households relied on when the pantry was light. Leftover cabbage, chopped fine, was sautéed in fat before being stirred into scrambled eggs, turning two basic foods into a sustaining dish. The cabbage stretched the eggs further, allowing larger families to fill plates without needing a dozen. It was hearty, yet inexpensive, providing vitamins and protein in a simple skillet meal. Farm families especially leaned on it, as cabbage was easy to grow and kept well into the colder months. The dish carried a humble flavor, but with hot sauce or pepper sprinkled on top, it was comforting and memorable. Children may not have loved cabbage, but when folded into eggs, it became tolerable and even enjoyable. For adults, it was practical, quick to make before long days of work, and efficient in using every bit of food available. Cabbage and egg scramble was modest, but it was deeply tied to survival and resilience in daily life. Peach preserves on hot biscuits with sunshine captured in a jar. Ripe peaches cooked down with sugar until golden and thick, the scent filling the kitchen like summer itself. Spread onto a steaming biscuit straight from the oven, the preserves melted into the crumb, seeping sweetness into every bite. It was sticky, messy, and utterly perfect. Grandmothers kept shelves lined with jars, each one a memory of fruit picked by hand and simmered slow. Those preserves were more than food. They were love saved for later, waiting for a cold morning to brighten. A biscuit topped with peach preserves was more than breakfast. It was a reminder that summer could be tasted even in the heart of winter. Families gathered around the table as the golden syrup dripped from fingers and laughter filled the air. Some added a pat of butter before spreading the preserves, letting the heat make everything glossy and rich. Every jar represented care, the patience to peel, stir, and seal by hand. The first taste always brought back long afternoons of harvest, of baskets heavy with peaches and sunlight. Peach preserves on biscuits were a bridge between seasons, a bite of warmth that carried through the year. Leftover fish and grits were a breakfast that turned yesterday's dinner into something new and comforting. Grandparents knew better than to waste good fried fish, and reheating it in the morning gave the house a rich, savory smell that made everyone wander toward the kitchen. The fish was warmed gently, keeping the crust crisp, then served alongside a bowl of buttery grits that balanced the strong flavor with something soft and smooth. It was a combination rooted in coastal and southern traditions, where fish was common and grits were always waiting in the pantry. Children grew up thinking nothing of fish for breakfast, tasting the salty crunch next to the warm creaminess of the grits. It was hearty, practical, and filling, the kind of breakfast that made you ready for a full day's work or school. Even today, one bite can transport people back to kitchens where cast iron pans never cooled and breakfast tasted like the continuation of joy from the night before. Cornmeal mush with maple syrup was proof that humble food could still feel like luxury. The cornmeal simmered low and slow until thick, its subtle sweetness waiting beneath the surface. Poured into bowls, it became creamy comfort. Chilled overnight and fried, it became something new. Either way, a drizzle of maple syrup transformed it completely, golden, fragrant, and warm. It was the taste of patience rewarded, of kitchens that made the most out of little. Grandparents ate it without complaint. Children learned to love it without realizing it was born from necessity. The syrup soaked into every bite, blending with the corn's earthiness until it became something deeply satisfying. In hard times, it was survival. In better ones, it was nostalgia. Cornmeal mush reminded families that gratitude could be sweet, especially when poured warm from a jug and shared around the table. Some cooks stirred in butter or milk to make it richer, while others poured it into loaf pans and sliced it for frying the next day. It was a dish that shifted effortlessly between breakfast and supper, proof that versatility was the heart of thrift. The sound of it frying in a skillet, the scent of corn and syrup mingling in the air, it all spoke of comfort. Cornmeal mush was a quiet triumph, a reminder that even the plainest ingredients could carry grace. Hog jowl and eggs was a breakfast that appeared especially around holidays, but its flavor and memory carried into everyday life. Hog jowl, a fatty cut of pork, was cheap and easy to find, especially in rural southern communities. Sliced thin and fried in skillets, it released rich fat that flavored the eggs cooked alongside it. Families treasured this dish when it appeared, because it added luxury to otherwise plain meals. It symbolized celebration, but it also reflected practicality, since hog jowl was inexpensive compared to other pork cuts. During the civil rights era, it fueled mornings with sustenance and comfort, giving families strength for long days ahead. Hog jowl and eggs represented both tradition and resilience, showing how households could enjoy moments of abundance even when times were lean. The dish was not only food, but a reminder of family gatherings, warmth, and the power of making the most of overlooked cuts. Grits and scrambled eggs were the foundation of the Southern morning. Grandparents stirred the grits slow, keeping them smooth and thick while eggs cooked soft and golden beside them. The smell of butter, salt, and heat filled the air, a smell that meant the day was beginning right. The two foods shared a plate, one creamy, one fluffy, both symbols of care. It was quick, affordable, and enough to keep the family full until noon. Sometimes a slice of bacon or a spoon of gravy joined the dish, but even plain, it felt whole. This was the meal of workers, of early risers and hopeful hearts. Every bite was steady, warm, and simple, a reminder that the best things in life often came from the smallest pots. The rhythm of whisking grits and scrambling eggs was morning music, soft and sure. It was eaten before the day's labor began, giving strength and calm in equal measure. Each bowl held a quiet promise that even in struggle, comfort could always be found at the table. Buttered hominy with bacon brought a smoky, buttery aroma to African-American breakfast tables of the 1970s, turning a humble grain into something rich and satisfying. White hominy kernels were simmered until tender, then sautéed in a heavy skillet with generous pats of butter. Crumbled strips of crisp bacon were folded in at the end, their savory fat blending with the buttery corn for layers of flavor. Some cooks added a sprinkle of black pepper or a pinch of red pepper flakes to deepen the taste, while others stirred in chopped green onions for brightness. Served alongside scrambled eggs or spooned over fresh cornbread, it offered hearty comfort that stuck with you through the morning. Buttered hominy with bacon celebrated both farm tradition and kitchen creativity, honoring a food once central to Native American diets and embraced by Southern cooks. Each bite carried the essence of smoky bacon and sweet corn, proving that simple, affordable ingredients could create a breakfast that felt luxurious without being complicated or costly. Rice pudding with raisins and nutmeg turned leftover rice into Thanksgiving morning sweetness that felt like dessert before the day started. Cold rice was mixed with milk, eggs, sugar, and plump raisins, then baked slowly until creamy and set. Nutmeg grated fresh over the top provided warm spice that made kitchens smell like celebration. This breakfast repurposed rice left from earlier meals, ensuring nothing was wasted. The pudding could be served warm or cold, making it versatile for busy mornings. Families treasured it because it tasted indulgent while using ingredients already on hand. Children picked out the raisins if they didn't like them, but adults savored every spoonful. The custard-like texture created comfort, while the sweetness provided energy. Rice pudding with raisins wasn't just thrifty cooking, but genuine deliciousness that happened to use leftovers. Okra and tomato breakfast stew offered a savory morning alternative that celebrated the summer garden's best. Fresh okra pods were sliced and simmered with ripe tomatoes, onions, and a hint of garlic until the vegetables softened into a flavorful broth. The natural thickening quality of okra gave the stew a gentle body, making it perfect for ladling over warm cornbread. Some families added smoked sausage or a pinch of cayenne for a heartier dish, while others kept it purely vegetarian, letting the vegetables shine. Served steaming hot, it filled the kitchen with a scent both earthy and bright, reminding everyone of harvest days and backyard gardens. Okra and tomato breakfast stew reflected African American traditions of making the most of seasonal produce, proving that breakfast could be savory, sustaining, and deeply tied to the land. It invited families to gather early and savor the simple pleasure of fresh vegetables cooked with care and served with love. Crackling bread was the sound and taste of tradition. Grandparents saved every pork scrap from butchering, frying them down until crisp. Those cracklings, salty and rich, were folded into cornbread batter that sizzled when it hit the skillet. The smell was deep, smoky, and warm, like comfort made edible. When it came out of the oven, the bread was golden brown, with crunchy bites hidden in every corner. It was heavy but satisfying, each piece holding the spirit of thrift and endurance. Families gathered around to eat it hot, breaking it apart with their hands. It was the kind of food that stretched a meal, that turned a handful of cornmeal and scraps into something filling and proud. Crackling bread was heritage baked into every crumb, a reminder that even the hardest times could taste good when shared together. The sound of the crust cracking filled the kitchen, mingling with laughter and the hum of stories passed down through generations. Every bite carried the memory of hard work, of families who found a way to turn survival into celebration. Served with greens or beans, it stood as proof that nothing from the land was wasted. In that bread lived history, care, and the soul of a people who made every meal mean something. Cornmeal donuts were one of the rare indulgences families created when they wanted sweetness but had little to spend. Made from cornmeal mixed with flour, eggs if available, and sweetened with a touch of sugar or molasses, the dough was shaped into rounds and fried in lard until golden. Dusted with sugar, they became a treat that brought children running to the table. Unlike bakery donuts, these were dense, filling, and rustic, but they carried a charm that came from being homemade. Families turned to them especially on weekends or special mornings when a little extra joy was needed to break the monotony of hardship. Cornmeal donuts were proof that celebration could exist even in times of scarcity, transforming everyday ingredients into something special. They were portable too, often tucked into lunch pails for later in the day. Cornmeal donuts may not have been fancy, but they were treasured, carrying both sweetness and comfort into mornings that demanded resilience. Coffee and sugar cookies might sound like dessert, but to grandparents, it was breakfast worth rising early for. The coffee was strong and dark, the kind brewed in enamel pots that never left the stove. The cookies were soft or crisp, depending on the household, often flavored with a hint of vanilla or nutmeg. Dipped into the steaming cup, they softened just enough to melt in your mouth. It was a quiet morning ritual, not rushed, not fancy, but full of grace. Adults called it a quick bite. Children called it heaven. There was something timeless about it, the sweetness balancing the bitterness, the warmth balancing the chill of dawn. For many, this pairing was not indulgence, it was peace. Coffee and sugar cookies were the kind of breakfast that taught you to slow down, to savor, and to start the day grateful. Peanut butter and corn syrup sandwiches were the kind of breakfast you could throw together in seconds, a heavy, sticky, sweet combination that kept kids full for hours. Grandparents spread thick peanut butter on soft sandwich bread and drizzled corn syrup over it, letting the syrup sink into the peanut butter until the whole thing clung together in a dense, satisfying bite. It was quick, cheap, and strong enough to carry a child through school mornings when there was no time for hot food. The sweetness blended with the saltiness of the peanut butter, creating a flavor that felt indulgent even though it came from pantry staples. Working households relied on this breakfast because it was dependable, affordable, and guaranteed to quiet hunger. Children loved its candy-like richness, even if the adults knew it was simply the best option available. Peanut butter and corn syrup sandwiches were a reminder of mornings shaped by love, necessity, and whatever ingredients were within reach. Fried salt pork with gravy over toast was Thanksgiving morning protein using preserved meat to create richness families couldn't afford fresh. Salt pork, the preserved fatback that lasted months without refrigeration, was sliced thin and fried until crispy in cast-iron skillets. The rendered fat was used to make gravy by adding flour and milk, creating creamy sauce poured over toasted bread. This breakfast provided essential calories and fat, helping families survive cold mornings before central heating. The salt pork was economical because it used pig parts preserved through salting to last through seasons. Grandmothers kept slabs in cool places, slicing off pieces as needed. The gravy stretched the meat to feed larger groups, with toast soaking up every drop. Children learned to appreciate this combination. Adults valued how the breakfast delivered energy without requiring fresh meat purchases. Salt pork with gravy was honest nourishment, proving preserved foods could create satisfaction. Cornmeal. Hoe cakes with honey butter sizzled on griddles across the South, offering a thin and crispy alternative to traditional pancakes. Finely ground cornmeal was whisked with hot water and a pinch of salt, then spooned onto a greased skillet where it cooked to a golden brown. The edges crisped while the center stayed tender, creating a satisfying contrast in every bite. A pat of soft butter blended with golden honey melted over the warm cakes, adding sweetness that complemented the rustic corn flavor. Hoe cakes were beloved for their simplicity and speed, perfect for busy mornings or serving alongside eggs and greens. African-American cooks carried this tradition from farm kitchens to city apartments, showing how a few ingredients could become a breakfast favorite. Children loved them plain, while adults enjoyed the gentle sweetness of honey butter that pooled across the hot surface. Cornmeal hoe cakes with honey butter proved that the humblest grains could shine when cooked with skill, care, and a sense of history. Fatback and grits was breakfast built on thrift and grit. The fatback sizzled in the skillet first, releasing its salty aroma as it browned and curled. The grease left behind became gold, seasoning the pot of bubbling grits to perfection. Stirred smooth, thick, and rich, the grits soaked up that savory flavor like a secret only the poor could afford to know. Grandparents served it in bowls, steaming and simple, with crispy bits of fatback on top. It was heavy in the best way, fuel for a long day of labor. There was pride in every bite, the kind of pride that came from making much out of little. Fatback and grits was not just breakfast, it was strength served with a spoon, a southern hymn sung over a hot stove. Sometimes a pat of margarine was dropped on top to melt into the heat, adding a layer of richness that made the bowl glisten. The meal was eaten slow, savoring every spoonful before the workday began. Grandparents said it was food that stuck to your ribs, and they were right. It kept you going long after sunrise. It tasted like memory and perseverance, like something deeper than hunger itself. Rolled oats with sorghum drizzle were one of the more nourishing breakfasts that families turned to during lean years. Oats were cheap, filling, and easy to cook, while sorghum syrup replaced sugar as a natural sweetener. Together, they made a bowl that was hearty, sustaining, and connected to the land. Adults leaned on it to fuel long workdays, and children were sent off to school with the strength it provided. The flavor was earthy and slightly bittersweet, carrying the essence of thrift and self-reliance. Families valued it because it stretched far and could be flavored with seasonal fruit if available. Rolled oats with sorghum drizzle represented more than practicality. It symbolized survival tied to agricultural tradition. It was a dish that reflected both health and heritage, remembered for its role in sustaining households during the civil rights era. It proved that nourishment could come from the humblest combinations, carrying families through mornings that demanded resilience and determination. Fried salt pork with eggs was breakfast before bacon took over the world. Thick slabs of cured pork belly hit a cast-iron skillet and began to sizzle, releasing a fragrance that woke the whole house. The fat crisped into edges that crackled with salt and flavor, while the drippings in the pan turned liquid gold. Into that same pan went the eggs, frying in the rendered fat until the whites blistered and the yolks gleamed. It was salty, rich, and comforting, the kind of breakfast that stayed with you through a day of hard labor. No one worried about cholesterol or calories back then. Food like this was about survival, satisfaction, and a little morning joy. Fried salt pork was poor man's bacon, but it never tasted like second best. Served with biscuits or grits, it brought warmth and strength to the table. It was a breakfast that said, "You'll make it through today." The smell lingered long after breakfast ended, clinging to aprons and walls like a memory of comfort. Sometimes a drizzle of blackstrap molasses or a spoon of apple butter cut through the salt, turning it into something almost sweet. Every bite carried the weight of hard work and the warmth of home, a reminder that strength could start from the simplest pan. Sweet rice fritters were one of those breakfasts that felt both like a treat and a solution, transforming leftover rice into something golden and warm that children loved. Grandparents would mix cold rice with sugar, flour, and sometimes a splash of milk or vanilla, forming the mixture into little patties that held together just enough to hit the skillet. As they fried, the edges crisped and the centers stayed soft, turning the rice into something closer to a sweet cake than a leftover. The sound of them sizzling in the pan was enough to wake the house, carrying a smell that felt gentle and inviting. These fritters cost almost nothing, yet somehow tasted like more effort had gone into them than the morning allowed. Served plain, dusted with sugar or drizzled with syrup, they were a breakfast that made children feel like they were being spoiled even though they came from last night's dinner. They were warm, soft, and just sweet enough to feel special. Sweet rice fritters were proof that older generations knew how to create comfort from whatever they had on hand. Gravy-soaked toast, known in military slang as SOS, became a homemade classic when adapted with love instead of rations. Leftover pan drippings from sausage or bacon were whisked with flour and milk, transforming into a thick, creamy gravy flecked with pepper. Instead of plain white bread, home cooks used toast made fresh that morning, letting it soak up the savory richness. It was simple but deeply satisfying, the kind of meal that filled empty stomachs and stretched scarce ingredients. Families learned to make it during hard times, and it stuck around because it was just that good. The combination of soft bread and velvety gravy made even an ordinary morning feel generous. Gravy-soaked toast was more than frugality. It was comfort made from care. Some added bits of sausage for heartiness, while others poured the gravy over biscuits instead, depending on what was on hand. It became a breakfast of survival and pride, the kind of food that tasted better than it had any right to. The aroma of sizzling drippings and toasting bread brought life to quiet mornings, reminding everyone that simple food done right could feed more than hunger. Gravy-soaked toast was an act of everyday kindness, a gesture that said, "We have enough, and we'll share it." Sweet potato coffee cakes were born of Southern improvisation, where fresh sweet potatoes were mashed into dough to stretch ingredients and add natural sweetness. Families mixed the potatoes with flour, sugar, and spices, creating a dense but moist cake that could be sliced and shared in the mornings. It carried the familiar flavor of sweet potatoes while saving on costly ingredients like butter or eggs. For children, sweet potato coffee cakes often felt like a treat, while adults appreciated the practicality of turning a root vegetable into a breakfast staple. The cake was filling and long-lasting, offering energy for long days of labor or activism. Because sweet potatoes were plentiful and inexpensive, this dish became a common sight on tables throughout the Civil Rights era. It was a symbol of making do, a reminder that families could create joy from what the land provided. Sweet potato coffee cakes carried resilience in every bite, bringing comfort to households even in the hardest years. Leftover collard greens and rice turned yesterday's dinner into today's survival. Grandparents reheated the greens slowly, letting their smoky flavor return, then folded in cooked rice until everything blended into one soulful dish. The broth turned the rice tender, absorbing all the spice and fat left behind from the pot. It was food with memory, Every bite carried yesterday's work and tomorrow's strength. The greens, once wilted, took on new life beside the soft rice, becoming breakfast that satisfied the hunger of both body and spirit. A drizzle of vinegar added brightness, a reminder that even hardship could taste alive. It was warm, it was nourishing, and it was never wasted. Families gathered around small tables, thankful that nothing from the night before went forgotten. In the quiet clatter of spoons and bowls, there was gratitude for every grain, every leaf, every bite that kept them moving forward. Some mornings, the pot would bubble again with new life, stretching the last of the greens just a little further. The meal wasn't just food, it was testimony, proof that nothing humble ever truly disappeared. It carried lessons of endurance, teaching that the best things often came from what was left behind. Sorghum syrup. Waffles filled kitchens with the warm scent of toasted grain and caramel sweetness, creating a breakfast that tasted like a weekend celebration. Batter made with fresh eggs and rich milk cooked in cast-iron waffle irons until crisp and golden, ready to catch every drop of thick sorghum syrup. This dark, earthy sweetener offered a depth of flavor beyond ordinary maple, with notes of molasses and a hint of smoke from the cane fields. Families in the South prized sorghum for its nutritional value and natural richness, making it a treasured pantry staple. Some cooks whipped a little butter into the syrup for a glossy glaze, while others drizzled it straight from the jar, letting the bold taste speak for itself. Sorghum syrup waffles reflected African American culinary heritage and the ability to elevate basic ingredients into something memorable, creating a breakfast that lingered in both flavor and memory. Every crunchy bite, followed by sticky sweetness, felt like a slow morning worth savoring. Leftover ham biscuits made from holiday ham scraps became Thanksgiving morning sandwiches that children grabbed before running outside. Small pieces of ham left from trimming the holiday roast were diced and stuffed into split biscuits, sometimes with butter or mustard spread inside. These portable breakfasts could be eaten with one hand, making them perfect for active mornings. The ham provided protein and salt that woke up taste buds, while the biscuits offered satisfying bread that filled stomachs. Grandmothers made dozens of biscuits the day before, knowing they could be repurposed throughout the holiday. Children appreciated the convenience and familiar flavors. Adults valued how the scraps that might have been discarded became proper breakfast, proving nothing was too small. Leftover ham biscuits showed the thrift that defined Black Southern cooking, demonstrating how even small scraps deserved respect and could become meals families enjoyed. Field pea and rice hash turned a simple pot of peas into a hearty breakfast that fueled long days with ease. Black-eyed peas were simmered with onions, garlic, and a little smoked meat until tender, then spooned generously over steaming white rice. The flavors melded into a comforting bowl of earthy beans and fluffy grains that filled stomachs and lifted spirits. In the 1970s, this dish connected generations, recalling the Hoppin' John traditions of New Year's Day, while serving as an everyday morning staple in many African American homes. Some families stirred in hot peppers for a gentle heat, while others finished with a drizzle of pepper vinegar for brightness. Field pea and rice hash proved that a few inexpensive ingredients could yield both nourishment and rich flavor, keeping families strong and satisfied. It celebrated agricultural roots and the creativity of cooks who understood that true comfort comes from a well-seasoned pot and the love shared around the breakfast table. Cornmeal pancakes were the breakfast that never failed to satisfy. When flour ran low, grandparents reached for cornmeal, mixing it with water, a pinch of salt, and whatever fat they had saved. The batter was thick and hearty, poured into a skillet greased with bacon drippings or lard. Each pancake came out golden and crisp at the edges, with a dense, warm center that held the taste of home. Syrup, molasses, or even a sprinkle of sugar made them sweet, but they were just as good plain. The smell of frying cornmeal filled the house, comforting and familiar, the sound of a day beginning right. Kids gathered around the table, forks ready, while grandparents flipped each one with practiced rhythm. Cornmeal pancakes were more than breakfast. They were survival turned soft and golden. In every bite was a story of making do, of turning simple things into something you could be proud to serve. Hominy pancakes were another clever way families stretched resources into filling meals. Hominy, boiled corn kernels treated with lye, was folded into simple flour batter and fried on a hot griddle until crisp on the edges. The result was a pancake that was hearty, chewy, and rich in flavor. Families leaned on this dish because hominy was inexpensive, filling, and often available in bulk. These pancakes were served plain or topped with syrup, molasses, or even just butter when sugar was scarce. Children enjoyed the slightly nutty texture, while adults appreciated that it carried them through long hours of work. Hominy pancakes were tied to heritage too, with roots reaching back to Native American food traditions that influenced Southern cooking. They were a reminder of resilience and cultural continuity, showing how simple staples could be reinvented to meet new needs. Hominy pancakes filled stomachs, but they also filled mornings with the comfort of tradition and the creativity of making do. Country ham with red-eye gravy was the kind of breakfast that woke the whole house before anyone sat down to eat. Thick slices of salt-cured ham hit a hot skillet, sizzling and popping until the edges turned crisp and caramelized. Once the ham was done, a splash of black coffee went straight into the pan, loosening up all those browned bits and transforming them into a smoky, savory gravy. That strange little mix of ham drippings and coffee was magic, salty, bitter, and rich all at once. Served with biscuits, the gravy soaked into every crumb, the kind of flavor that could only come from patience and cast iron. It was a dish that spoke of early mornings and hard work, the kind of food made to keep a farmer going until noon. Every family had their own method, their own rhythm of stirring and scraping the pan. Red-eye gravy was never about looks. It was about the smell, the sound, the taste of something honest. Country ham and red-eye gravy made even an ordinary morning feel proud. Butter sugar toast was the quick, sweet breakfast many children rushed toward before school, made from nothing more than bread, butter, and a sprinkle of sugar. Grandparents spread the butter all the way to the edges, making sure every bite would melt just right. The toast warmed the sugar until it softened slightly, creating a delicate crunch that felt almost like a treat. It was simple, fast, and inexpensive, yet it tasted like something far more indulgent. For many children, this was the breakfast they could hold in one hand while tying their shoes with the other. It tasted like busy mornings, like running out the door with crumbs on your shirt, like the gentle love of someone who wanted you fed. Even when there was no time, butter sugar toast may be overlooked today, but the memory of it still lingers for anyone who grew up on its warm sweetness. Stewed prunes with grits might sound plain today, but it was a dish that kept households nourished and children strong. Prunes were affordable, dried, and easy to store, making them a reliable sweetener when sugar was limited. Simmered until soft and paired with steaming bowls of grits, they turned into a balanced meal of fiber, sweetness, and filling grains. Large families often leaned on this combination because it could stretch far with little cost. For children, stewed prunes made breakfast feel less plain, while adults valued the strength it provided for long workdays. It was also a dish that traveled through generations, passed down as a memory of lean years and perseverance. Families carried bowls of this simple breakfast before marches, school, and shifts, finding strength in the comfort of familiarity. Stewed prunes with grits became a quiet but powerful dish of the civil rights era, proving that even the humblest meals could carry dignity and hope. Cane syrup toast was sweetness for hard times. When butter ran out and sugar was gone, grandparents made syrup from cane or brown sugar water simmered until thick. They spread it over hot bread, watching it soak into every crumb. It was simple, sticky, and sweet enough to feel like dessert even when it was breakfast. The syrup clung to fingers, the bread soft and warm. It was a small joy, a reminder that sweetness could always be found, even in struggle. That first bite tasted like love disguised as survival, and for many, it was the best part of the morning. The syrup dripped slow, shining under morning light, while kids licked it from their hands and laughed. It was a moment of delight before a long day, proof that life's smallest blessings could still feel grand. Every bite carried the taste of resilience, turning scarcity into sweetness. Fried cornmeal hoe cakes with apple butter connected families to their agricultural heritage and survival traditions. The hoe cakes were mixed from cornmeal, water, and salt, then fried on hot griddles until golden brown with crispy edges. Apple butter made from fall apples cooked down with spices provided sweetness without expensive jam. This breakfast appeared on Thanksgiving because both cornmeal and apples were fall harvest products. Grandmothers made dozens of hoe cakes, stacking them high and keeping them warm under kitchen towels. The name itself carried history, referencing when field workers cooked cornmeal cakes on hoes over open fires. Children spread apple butter thick, enjoying the sweet tart flavor against earthy corn. Adults paired them with coffee, appreciating how the simple combination provided energy. Hoe cakes cost almost nothing but delivered satisfaction. They represented ingenuity of turning basic staples into something worth celebrating. Rice and raisins with butter was the kind of breakfast that felt like a treat, even though it came from the most basic pantry ingredients a household always had on hand. Long before sugary cereal brands took over the shelves, many families started their day with a warm bowl of rice simmered until soft and mixed with sweet raisins that plumped in the heat. A pat of butter melted over the top, coating each grain and adding richness that made the dish feel far more indulgent than its low cost suggested. It was warm, steady, and comforting, the kind of breakfast that felt like a hug before school or chores. Grandparents made it because rice was cheap, raisins lasted forever in a jar, and butter brought everything together in a way that tasted wholesome and familiar. Some added a sprinkle of sugar, others a dash of cinnamon, but most kept it simple, letting the steam rise like a quiet morning ritual. The flavor was gentle, the sweetness mild, and the bowl always seemed to disappear faster than expected. For many families, this dish was tied to winter mornings, cold floors, and the feeling of being cared for before the day even started. Even today, people who grew up with rice and raisins remember the way it filled the house with warmth and made them feel ready for anything. Scrapple was the breakfast that turned thrift into art. Born in the mid-Atlantic, it began as a mix of pork trimmings, cornmeal, and spices, cooked until thick and poured into a loaf to set. Once chilled, it was sliced and fried until crisp on the outside and soft within. The result was savory, hearty, and unlike anything else, a flavor that lingered long after the plate was empty. For generations, scrapple was the farmer's first meal, eaten with eggs or syrup depending on the mood. It carried the spirit of practicality, nothing wasted, everything used. What began as a way to stretch ingredients became a tradition, one that still lives on in diners and family kitchens. Scrapple was breakfast for people who worked hard and appreciated the simple genius of turning leftovers into something extraordinary. It was humble, yes, but it was also pride in edible form. Leftover rice pancakes were the invention of hungry mornings. Cold rice mixed with flour, egg, and a little sugar turned into batter, then fried into soft golden cakes. They crisped at the edges and steamed in the center, smelling like comfort reborn. Grandparents drizzled syrup or butter over the top, calling it a special breakfast even when it was born from scraps. The pancakes were sweet and tender, their warmth stretching far beyond the plate. Every bite carried gratitude, a quiet celebration of resourcefulness that turned leftovers into joy. The sound of the batter hitting the skillet was soft but sure, like morning routine meeting creativity. The first pancake was always eaten standing at the stove, still hot, still bubbling with syrup. It tasted like invention, like pride disguised as sweetness. It was survival dressed up as a treat, and it never failed to bring a smile. Homemade syrup sandwiches were one of the quickest breakfasts for children heading to school or adults heading to work. A slice of bread was spread with cane syrup or sorghum, then topped with another slice and eaten on the go. It was sticky, sweet, and satisfying, even if it was far from fancy. Families leaned on it because it was cheap, easy, and gave just enough energy to last until the next meal. For children, it often felt like a treat, even when it was born out of necessity. Adults remembered it as a sign of thrift, proof that households made do with what they had. Homemade syrup sandwiches were a dish of survival and memory, tied to the realities of life in communities that faced both economic and social hardship. They symbolized not only sweetness in lean times, but also the determination to keep moving forward each morning, fueled by the simplest of meals. Salmon croquettes with grits turned pantry staples into a breakfast feast that felt both luxurious and familiar across African American communities of the 1970s. Canned salmon was flaked into a bowl with onions, breadcrumbs, and a little seasoning, then shaped into neat patties ready for the skillet. As they fried, the croquettes developed a crisp golden crust while staying moist inside, their aroma mingling with the gentle steam of creamy stone-ground grits bubbling nearby. This pairing brought together the coastal traditions of the South and the practicality of modern kitchens, where canned fish kept well and stretched to feed a family. Some cooks added a squeeze of lemon or a pinch of cayenne for extra brightness and heat, while others folded in fresh herbs from backyard gardens. Served with a side of sliced tomatoes or greens, salmon croquettes with grits delivered protein, comfort, and a taste of heritage, showing how everyday ingredients could be elevated into a soulful breakfast worth savoring. Canned salmon patties with scrambled eggs provided Thanksgiving morning seafood when fresh fish wasn't available or affordable. Canned salmon was mixed with breadcrumbs, beaten eggs, and chopped onions, formed into patties and fried until crispy. Served alongside scrambled eggs, this breakfast offered double protein. The salmon patties cost little since canned fish was shelf-stable and economical. In Black households where Friday fish traditions remained strong, having seafood on Thanksgiving morning felt appropriate. The crispy coating contrasted with soft eggs, creating textural variety. Children picked at the salmon bones if any remained. Adults appreciated how the canned fish provided omega-3 nutrition without requiring fresh market trips. Canned salmon patties with eggs represented practical protein solutions that honored cultural food preferences while respecting limited budgets. Fried salmon patties for breakfast might seem unusual today, but for many African American families in the 60s and 70s, canned salmon was a dependable pantry staple that worked for any meal of the day. Grandparents mixed the salmon with breadcrumbs, onions, and seasoning, shaping it into patties that sizzled in the skillet until crisp. The smell filled the kitchen with something hearty and inviting, a bold start to the morning that made you feel ready for whatever the day demanded. Served with grits or biscuits, the patties tasted rich and satisfying, proof that canned ingredients could create meals full of flavor and comfort. Salmon was not expensive, but it felt special, which made breakfast feel special too. Children grew used to that savory taste long before they ever tried a restaurant version. Fried salmon patties were practical, filling, and unforgettable, a reminder of how creativity in the kitchen shaped so many childhood mornings. Homemade donuts were a labor of love long before convenience ever came in a box. Families mixed flour, eggs, milk, and a little sugar by hand, rolling the dough on floured tables before cutting perfect rings. The oil had to be just right, hot enough to bubble but not burn, and the kitchen filled with the smell of sweetness meeting heat. Each donut puffed up golden and soft, kissed with crispness at the edges. Once drained, they were rolled in sugar or dipped in glaze, still warm and tender. Children waited eagerly, dusting their fingers in sugar while stealing the first taste. These weren't store-bought treats. They were handmade rewards, crafted slowly on quiet mornings. A batch of donuts meant love, celebration, or simply the joy of having enough ingredients to spare. They were simple yet sacred, proof that happiness could be fried and shared. Some cooks made holes into tiny donut balls, frying them as munchkins before the name ever existed. Others flavored the dough with nutmeg or a splash of buttermilk for tang. The smell of homemade donuts lingered like a song through the house, reminding everyone that effort and sweetness often went hand in hand. Cabbage and onions with cornbread made a humble breakfast that filled both the belly and the heart. When meat was scarce, the skillet became a garden feast. Grandparents chopped cabbage fresh from the yard or the market, tossing it with sliced onions and a bit of lard or grease. The smell that rose from the pan was earthy and warm, like hope frying slow. As it cooked down, the cabbage softened and the onions turned sweet, making a broth rich enough to dip bread into. Cornbread baked in the oven beside it, crusty on top and tender inside. The two came together on the plate, steam rising in quiet grace. It was not fancy, but it was full of care. The kind of meal that kept families going through hard seasons, reminding them that flavor did not come from plenty. It came from patience. Every bite spoke of the land, of effort, and of faith in simple things. The cornbread soaked up the juices, catching every drop like a blessing. In those moments, a table without meat still felt abundant, and no one left hungry. Fried apples with brown sugar filled kitchens with the scent of caramel and spice as butter sizzled in heavy skillets across African-American homes of the 1970s. Thick apple slices were laid into the pan where they softened and browned, soaking up melted butter and a slow sprinkle of dark brown sugar. The sugar melted into a glossy syrup that coated every piece, creating a warm and fragrant side that paired perfectly with hot bread or flaky biscuits. Some cooks added a pinch of cinnamon or nutmeg, while others squeezed in a little lemon juice to brighten the sweetness. Families loved these fried apples as a weekend treat, serving them alongside sausage, grits, or even spooned over pancakes for an indulgent start to the morning. The dish honored a tradition of turning simple farm fruit into something special without wasting a single ingredient. Fried apples with brown sugar captured the heart of home-style cooking, transforming an everyday apple into a rich and memorable breakfast delight. Buttermilk pancakes with cane syrup were Thanksgiving morning treats that made children feel special before the elaborate dinner. The pancakes were made from scratch using buttermilk that created tender, fluffy texture with slightly tangy flavor. Cane syrup, cheaper and more accessible than maple syrup in the South, was poured generously over stacks of golden cakes. This breakfast felt indulgent, even though the ingredients were basic pantry staples. Grandmothers made large batches, flipping pancakes on hot griddles while managing other tasks. The buttermilk's acidity reacted with baking soda, creating lightness that made each bite melt in the mouth. Children counted how many pancakes they ate, competing with siblings. Adults enjoyed them slowly, appreciating the care that went into making breakfast from scratch. Buttermilk pancakes with cane syrup represented balance between thrift and celebration. Molasses biscuits were one of those breakfasts that felt both humble and rich, depending entirely on the memory you brought to the table. The biscuits themselves were simple, mixed from flour, fat, and whatever milk or water could be spared, but it was the molasses brushed over the top that made them special. The dark sweetness soaked into the warm bread, giving each bite a deep flavor that felt like comfort stretching back generations. Grandparents baked these because molasses was cheap, shelf-stable, and full of the kind of sweetness that made children smile even when times were tight. The smell alone could bring the whole household into the kitchen, filling the air with something warm and grounding. Some families served them with butter, letting it melt into every crack, while others ate them plain, enjoying the caramel-like richness all on its own. These biscuits were not fancy, but they tasted like care, like effort, like mornings where love was baked into every crumb. They were the kind of breakfast that lingered in your memory long after the plate was empty, reminding you of kitchens where nothing was wasted and everything was shared. Corn fritters with syrup were the morning's golden reward for those who knew how to turn scraps into sweetness. Leftover corn or cornmeal batter was mixed with milk, sugar, and a touch of salt, then spooned into a hot skillet where it puffed and browned into tender cakes. The air filled with the smell of butter and corn, sweet and comforting all at once. Once stacked on a plate, a drizzle of syrup sealed the deal. Sticky, glossy, irresistible. The first bite had a little crisp from the edges and a soft heart that melted on the tongue. Fritters like these were both breakfast and memory, made by grandparents who never threw a thing away. They were perfect with coffee, even better with laughter, and best when shared. No one called them fancy, but they felt that way, proof that love and creativity could make anything shine. Wild berry syrup on biscuits was a dish that connected people to the land around them. Families foraged for blackberries, muscadines, or other wild berries when money for store-bought sugar was scarce. The berries were boiled down into thick syrups, which were then poured generously over biscuits hot from the oven. This simple act turned foraging into a memory of sweetness, tying hard times to small joys. Children especially looked forward to berry syrup, savoring the rare taste of fruit in seasons when fresh produce was otherwise out of reach. Adults valued it as a resourceful way of providing variety without spending money. Wild berry syrup on biscuits carried with it the taste of summer, the memory of hands stained purple from picking, and the resilience of communities who found sweetness in the fields and woods. It was survival made delicious, a reminder that even in scarcity, families could still find ways to savor life's small pleasures. Fried corn and onions with grits was a skillet breakfast that felt like sunshine in a bowl. Corn kernels popped and sizzled in bacon grease, mixing with chopped onions that browned slow and sweet. The scent filled the air, earthy and inviting. When spooned over hot grits, the mixture created a perfect balance: sweet, salty, creamy, and crisp. Grandparents called it country gold, a dish that could feed many with little. It was hearty, colorful, and full of life. Each spoonful brought together the garden and the stove, the land and the table. Fried corn and onions with grits wasn't just breakfast, it was heritage served hot. It told the story of people who turned simplicity into art, one skillet at a time. Some mornings, a sprinkle of pepper or a spoonful of milk joined the pot, turning the humble bowl into something close to sacred. It was a reminder that even in scarcity, flavor, love, and hope never ran out. Leftover dressing fried into patties became Thanksgiving morning transformation that gave new life to yesterday's carefully prepared side dish that might otherwise have gone to waste. Cornbread dressing left from testing recipes was formed into palm-sized patties and fried in butter until crusty outside and soft inside. The herbs, onions, and celery in the dressing provided complex savory flavor, while frying added golden crust that made them irresistible to both children and adults alike. These patties could be eaten with eggs or alone, providing filling breakfast that satisfied without being heavy or overwhelming. Grandmothers valued this technique because it used food that might otherwise go stale, showing the waste not philosophy that guided their kitchens every single day without exception. Children enjoyed the crispy exterior and familiar flavors that reminded them of holiday dinners. Adults appreciated how the patties felt special and intentional rather than like simple leftovers. Collard green and onion hash gave leafy greens a starring role, turning a traditional dinner side into a savory breakfast companion. Fresh collard greens were sliced thin and quickly sautéed with sweet onions, a little garlic, and a splash of vegetable broth until tender yet vibrant. The result was a smoky, nutrient-rich hash that paired beautifully with eggs, grits, or cornbread. Some families added diced potatoes for extra heartiness, while others seasoned with a pinch of red pepper flakes to wake up the taste buds. This dish reflected a deep appreciation for garden vegetables and the ingenuity of African-American cooks who brought dinner flavors to the morning table. Collard green and onion hash provided iron, vitamins, and a satisfying warmth that lasted through long days. Its quick preparation and bold taste made it a weekday favorite, while its connection to Southern tradition made it feel timeless, proving that breakfast could be as wholesome and flavorful as any evening meal. Red-eye gravy and biscuits gave breakfast a bold, bitter soul. Born from ham drippings and black coffee, it was thin, smoky, and sharp enough to wake you faster than any alarm. Grandparents poured the hot coffee into the greasy skillet, scraping the bottom to gather every bit of flavor. The smell hit first, strong, dark, and unmistakable. Fresh biscuits soaked it up like sponges, turning bitter into savory beauty. It was a meal for workers, for those who rose before dawn and needed fire in their bellies. Red-eye gravy did not pretend to be sweet or gentle. It was honest, intense, and unforgettable. Grandparents said it was a grown folks breakfast, the kind that taught you to face the day head on. The flavor was bold, a mix of smoke and bitterness that tasted like life itself, hard, sharp, but satisfying. Every bite carried stories of mornings spent in fields or factories, hands rough but hearts steady. It was more than a meal. It was morning courage in liquid form. Fried bologna on white bread was one of the most common breakfasts for working families during the Civil Rights era. Bologna was affordable, and frying it in a skillet brought out flavor and made it feel more substantial. Layered on soft white bread with mustard or hot sauce, it became a sandwich that was cheap, quick, and filling. For children, it was often packed as lunch, but for adults, it was breakfast before long shifts in fields, factories, or offices. The salty, savory taste was familiar and comforting, even if it came from one of the cheapest meats available. Fried bologna sandwiches symbolized both thrift and practicality, reflecting the reality of what many households relied on to get by. They were humble, but they carried enough strength to power people through demanding days. This dish became part of the memory of struggle and perseverance, a reminder that even inexpensive food could play a role in fueling determination and resilience. Hot grits with butter and salt were the backbone of countless Southern mornings, a dish so simple yet so sacred that no table felt complete without it. Made from ground hominy simmered until smooth, grits were the definition of patience rewarded. They needed time, stirring, and a steady hand to reach the perfect texture. Not too thick, not too thin, just creamy enough to coat a spoon. A pat of butter on top melted into golden swirls, and a pinch of salt brought everything to life. This was food made for strength, for those who worked in fields, factories, or kitchens from dawn to dusk. It was nourishment that filled the belly and steadied the spirit. Children learned early how to stir the pot, to keep the grits from clumping, to treat the meal with the respect it deserved. Some added milk, some cheese, some even sugar, but pure grits with butter and salt needed nothing more. It was more than breakfast. It was a ritual of care and endurance. In a world that moved fast, this bowl forced you to slow down and savor the quiet. Scrapple slices were one of the most resourceful breakfasts older generations relied on, especially in regions where nothing from the pig went to waste. Scrapple mixed pork scraps with cornmeal and spices, forming a loaf that could be sliced and fried until crisp on the outside and soft on the inside. Grandparents cooked it in a hot skillet, letting each piece form that perfect golden crust that crackled slightly under the fork. It was savory, hearty, and deeply rooted in tradition, a dish born from the idea that every ingredient had value. Some families ate it plain, others added syrup or mustard, but no matter how it was served, scrapple had a distinctive flavor that stayed with you. It tasted like farm mornings, like smoke rising from cast iron pans, like a time when food came from skill rather than convenience. Children might turn up their noses at the idea today, but to those who grew up on it, scrapple was a breakfast that meant strength, thrift, and the comfort of knowing a meal would always be there. Even now, the memory of that sizzling sound brings people back to early mornings in small kitchens where tradition guided the skillet. Eggless mayonnaise biscuits were one of those recipes that came out of necessity, but lingered in kitchens long after shortages eased. Families discovered that a spoonful of mayonnaise could stand in for eggs and fat, binding dough into soft, fluffy biscuits without using precious rationed ingredients. During the Civil Rights era, this recipe stuck around because it was practical and affordable, perfect for households where money and supplies were always stretched thin. Mothers could bake a tray in the morning, serving them plain, with syrup, or alongside whatever small scraps were available. Children often carried leftovers in their pockets to school, eating them between lessons for a bit of comfort and energy. The taste was familiar and reliable, even if the origins came from harder times. Eggless mayonnaise biscuits symbolized more than just thrift. They carried the determination to keep families fed through resourcefulness. They became a quiet staple on breakfast tables that fueled long days of work, activism, and resilience. Sausage patties with fried apples made mornings feel rich, even when the pantry was bare. The sausage sizzled in a skillet, its fat spitting softly, while the kitchen filled with the smell of spice and salt. Apples, sliced thin, were dropped into the same pan afterward, soaking up the drippings until their edges caramelized. The result was a perfect balance of flavors: smoky meat and sweet fruit, savory and soft. Served side by side, they made an unlikely pair that just worked. The meal was hearty, comforting, and practical. 2 ingredients stretched to feed many. It was the kind of breakfast that fueled both body and heart, reminding families that creativity was the secret to good cooking. Every bite told a story of resourcefulness, of turning what you had into something worth remembering. Sometimes a touch of cinnamon or brown sugar was added to the apples, the sweetness blending with the sausage's spice to make every forkful unforgettable. It was a dish that filled bellies and lifted moods, proof that food didn't need luxury to feel abundant. This pairing of opposites, salt and sugar, crisp and soft, became a symbol of balance in the Southern kitchen. It was comfort on a plate, built from simple genius and the magic of making do. Sorghum syrup biscuits were the sweet glue of country mornings, simple yet divine. Grandparents mixed flour, lard, and milk, cutting the dough by hand and baking it until the tops turned golden. While the biscuits rose, the sorghum syrup sat warming on the stove, thick, dark, and sticky as the sun coming up. Sorghum was cheaper than sugar and easier to find, made from local cane that families often grew themselves. When the biscuits came out, steaming and soft, a drizzle of syrup transformed them into luxury. The smell filled the room, earthy, rich, and pure. Kids licked their fingers, and adults smiled quietly, knowing this was a taste of home. The syrup clung to the edges of the biscuits, turning every bite into a memory. It was breakfast, dessert, and comfort all at once. Even on hard days, sorghum biscuits gave sweetness without waste. They were the pride of the Southern table, humble, homemade, and healing. Leftover cornbread soaked in buttermilk and sweetened with molasses used what remained from Wednesday's supper, transforming it into Thursday morning comfort. Crumbled cornbread filled bowls, then cold buttermilk was poured over until the bread softened and absorbed the tangy liquid. Dark molasses drizzled on top provided sweetness that balanced the buttermilk's sour bite. This breakfast cost virtually nothing since it repurposed yesterday's bread and used staples every household kept. Grandmothers understood that nothing could be wasted when resources were limited. Children initially resisted the unusual combination, but learned to love its tangy sweetness. Adults appreciated how the simple bowl provided energy and nostalgia. The breakfast was especially common where buttermilk came from churning butter and molasses was cheaper than refined sugar. Leftover cornbread and buttermilk proved yesterday's food could become today's treasure. Stewed prunes and citrus offered a naturally sweet and nourishing side that fit perfectly with the back-to-nature movement of the 1970s. Dried prunes were simmered gently in water with slices of orange or lemon until they softened into a rich compote. A touch of cinnamon or clove added warmth, and the citrus brightened the deep, earthy flavor of the fruit. This dish required little sugar because the natural sweetness of the prunes intensified as they cooked, creating a syrupy juice that tasted indulgent yet wholesome. Served warm over oatmeal, alongside biscuits, or even chilled with yogurt, it provided fiber and essential vitamins that families valued. African American households embraced it for both its practicality and comfort, turning an inexpensive ingredient into something special. Stewed prunes and citrus stood as a testament to mindful cooking, where a simple pot of fruit could deliver nutrition and quiet pleasure, reminding everyone that breakfast could be as healthful as it was delicious without any extravagant ingredients or effort. Fried cornmeal mush with syrup was one of those breakfasts that quietly carried families through the hardest decades, long before boxed cereal took over the mornings. A pot of mush would be cooked and thickened the night before because nothing could go to waste, and cornmeal was one of the cheapest staples you could rely on. By sunrise, it would be firm enough to slice, each piece hitting the skillet with that gentle hiss that meant breakfast was truly beginning. The outside browned until crisp, while the inside stayed soft, warm, and steady, making every bite feel both hearty and familiar. When syrup was poured over those golden slices, it turned the humble dish into something sweet and comforting, the kind of sweetness that did not need to be fancy to feel special. Grandparents made this because it filled bellies, stretched ingredients, and tasted like something far richer than it really was. Children did not think about thrift or struggle, they just knew it tasted like love served on a plate. Fried mush might look simple today, but its roots run deep in memory, in resilience, in the way older generations held families together one skillet breakfast at a time. Even now, one bite brings back chilly mornings, warm kitchens, and the soft scrape of a metal spatula flipping a slice just right. Fried salt pork and gravy was breakfast born from preservation and patience. Grandparents sliced the cured meat thin, sizzling it in a skillet until the fat turned crisp and fragrant. The salty aroma filled the air, sharp but comforting. The leftover drippings stayed in the pan, thickened with flour and water to make a gravy that stretched across biscuits or grits. It was heavy, hearty, and enough to fuel long days of work. Every piece of pork carried the taste of tradition, food made to last, food that respected every scrap. The gravy was creamy and rich, coating the plate like warmth itself. Children wiped their plates clean with biscuits, unwilling to waste even a drop. It was not fancy, but it was full of care, a reminder that flavor could rise from necessity. In that skillet, hardship turned into something nourishing, something that said, "We made it through another morning." Cornmeal mush with sorghum butter filled stomachs and provided sustained energy for the long cooking day ahead. The mush was made by slowly cooking coarse cornmeal in water or milk until it thickened into smooth porridge, stirred constantly to prevent lumps. Sorghum butter came from beating softened butter with dark sorghum syrup until it turned golden and spreadable, creating sweetness without expensive sugar. Served hot in bowls with generous dollops melting on top, this breakfast cost pennies but delivered warmth. In rural homes where money was tight but corn was abundant, this dish appeared regularly on Thanksgiving morning. Grandmothers understood that starting with hot food meant children would be patient while the feast was prepared. The cornmeal's earthy flavor balanced perfectly with sorghum's deep molasses notes. Families ate in shifts, with the cook eating last. This wasn't deprivation, but resourcefulness transformed into tradition. Hot water cornbread breakfast cakes were the quick morning version of a beloved staple that had already lived lifetimes in African American kitchens. A bowl of cornmeal mixed with boiling water created a dough that came together almost instantly, proving that good food did not need complicated steps or expensive supplies. Grandparents shaped the dough with their hands, patting each cake gently before laying it into the skillet where it sizzled and tightened into a crisp golden edge. These smaller breakfast cakes were eaten warm, often with a smear of jam, a drizzle of honey, or just a little butter melting across the top. The texture was dense but soft, hearty but still light enough to enjoy early in the morning. It tasted like home, like tradition, like something passed down not through written recipes but through practiced hands that knew exactly how the batter should feel. These cakes made mornings easier, faster, and far more delicious than anyone expected from such simple ingredients. Children loved them because they felt like little treats, bite-sized comforts that fit perfectly into small hands. Adults loved them because they stretched the pantry and kept everyone fed without fuss or cost. Hot water cornbread breakfast cakes were proof that a skillet, some cornmeal, and a steady hand could create something unforgettable day after day. Molasses cornmeal custard was a dish that offered sweetness and substance while depending only on pantry staples. Families baked it by whisking cornmeal, milk, eggs when available, and molasses into a smooth mixture that thickened into a soft pudding in the oven. It was inexpensive to prepare, but filling enough to feed a household, making it a beloved breakfast or after-supper treat. The flavor was earthy and rich, with the deep sweetness of molasses carrying through each bite. Children often looked forward to it as a rare indulgence in households where desserts were not common. Adults valued it for its practicality, since it used cheap ingredients that could stretch for days. Molasses cornmeal custard represented thrift, but it also carried warmth and a sense of care, showing how families turned necessities into moments of comfort. It became part of the memory of kitchens during times of struggle, a dish that balanced scarcity with sweetness. Potato hash with onions and peppers was the morning's miracle made from scraps. Grandparents diced leftover boiled potatoes, tossing them into a skillet slick with grease. Onions and peppers joined next, sizzling until soft and golden. The smell rose up, sweet, smoky, and alive. Salt and pepper did the rest, no fancy spices needed. The potatoes crisped at the edges, turning brown and crunchy while the center stayed soft. Served hot with eggs or bread, it filled the room with satisfaction. It was the kind of meal that looked humble but felt whole. You could feed a family on it, stretch it for another day, or serve it proudly on Sunday. Potato hash with onions and peppers was proof that waste didn't exist in a wise kitchen. Every bit could be reborn, every leftover turned into something loved. Sometimes sausage or fatback joined the pan, adding depth and flavor, but the dish never needed more than care. It carried the rhythm of home, the steady scrape of a spatula, the pop of oil, the warmth of shared hunger met with love. Catfish and grits gave weekend mornings a soulful edge, pairing crisp fried fish with creamy stone-ground grits in a combination that felt both rustic and celebratory. Fresh river catfish fillets were seasoned with salt, pepper, and a dusting of cornmeal before sliding into hot oil where they sizzled to a golden brown. The grits simmered slowly on the stove, enriched with butter and a touch of cream for a silky texture that balanced the crunch of the fish. Families often gathered around big skillets of catfish on Sundays after church, turning breakfast into a communal event. Some added a squeeze of lemon or a dash of hot sauce to brighten the flavors, while others served sliced tomatoes or greens on the side. Catfish and grits carried the heritage of Southern waterways and the ingenuity of African-American cooks who transformed local catches into a beloved morning feast that satisfied hunger and celebrated the bounty of rivers and farms alike. Leftover sweet potato pie filling spread on toast became Thanksgiving morning sweetness that used every bit of holiday preparation. When grandmothers made sweet potato pies for dinner, extra filling often remained in the mixing bowl. Rather than waste it, the spiced sweet potato mixture was spread thick on toasted bread, creating breakfast that tasted like dessert. The filling contained eggs, milk, sugar, and warm spices like cinnamon and nutmeg, making it nutritious as well as delicious. Children loved this unexpected treat, feeling like they were getting away with eating pie for breakfast. Adults enjoyed the creative repurposing, appreciating how nothing was wasted. The sweet potatoes provided vitamins and fiber while the toast offered substance and texture. This breakfast cost nothing extra since it used ingredients already prepared for the day's feast. Leftover sweet potato pie filling on toast represented the ultimate waste-not wisdom, showing how grandmothers viewed every ingredient as precious. Cracklin' biscuits were a breakfast born from tradition. From kitchens where pork cracklings were saved and treasured because they added flavor nothing else could match, mixed into biscuit dough. The cracklings melted slightly as the biscuits baked, releasing savory richness into every bite. Grandparents made these biscuits with steady hands and an understanding of how to stretch ingredients while still creating something deeply satisfying. The result was warm, crumbly, and full of flavor. A biscuit that needed no butter or jam to taste complete. It was the kind of breakfast that connected families to their heritage, to moments when nothing went to waste and everything had a purpose. Children often loved the surprising crunch, not realizing it came from a history of thrift and creativity. Cracklin' biscuits remain a powerful memory for many, a taste of home that has the strength of generations behind it. Biscuits and sausage gravy were the heart and soul of country breakfasts. Flaky biscuits baked fresh, split open, and drenched in a thick, peppery gravy made from sausage drippings, flour, and milk. The smell alone could wake the whole house. It was a meal that filled the stomach and soothed the spirit, one that required no fancy tools, only time and care. The gravy clung to every crumb, rich and savory, while the biscuits absorbed just enough to stay soft. This was the food of hospitality, the dish you made when guests came or when you simply wanted to treat your own family right. Every cook had their secret: more pepper, a touch of butter, maybe a pinch of sage. But no matter how it was made, it always meant comfort. Biscuits and sausage gravy were the definition of generosity served hot. Hot water. Cornbread was the taste of resilience fried golden. Made from cornmeal, salt, and boiling water, it took almost nothing to prepare. Just heat, hands, and a little patience. Grandparents mixed it until thick, shaped small patties and dropped them into sizzling oil. The kitchen filled with that sound, soft crackles and promise. The outside crisped brown, the inside stayed tender, and the smell of corn filled the air. Served hot with greens, beans, or on its own, it was both bread and meal. It was the working person's comfort, made quick and eaten proud. No milk, no eggs, no fancy tools, just skill passed down through hands that refused to give up. Each bite was a memory of endurance, of turning a few ingredients into a reason to keep going. Salted fish cakes for breakfast carried a flavor that was bold, practical, and tied to tradition. Families made them by mixing scraps of salted fish with meal or leftover potatoes, shaping patties, and frying them crisp in a skillet. The result was savory, filling, and inexpensive, making it a reliable protein source when other meats were far out of reach. In coastal communities or areas where salted fish was a common trade, this dish became a morning standard, paired often with eggs if the household could spare them. Children sometimes found the taste strong, but adults appreciated its sustenance and the way it stretched simple ingredients. Fish cakes often carried the memory of family gatherings, with parents teaching children how to prepare them just as their parents once had. It was a dish that reflected survival, thrift, and culinary creativity, embodying how overlooked scraps could become the backbone of a morning meal. Salted fish cakes for breakfast held both history and hunger in balance, fueling resilience through humble bites. Fried mullet with hush puppies brought the flavor of coastal mornings to inland tables, celebrating the bounty of southern waters. Fresh mullet fillets were seasoned and lightly dredged in cornmeal before being fried to a crisp golden finish, their mild flesh staying tender and flaky. Alongside the fish, cornmeal hush puppies sizzled in the same hot oil, forming round fritters with a crunchy crust and soft, savory interior. The combination delivered a contrast of textures and tastes that spoke of seaside breakfasts and family gatherings. Some cooks added chopped onions or jalapenos to the hush puppies for an extra kick, while others served lemon wedges to brighten the fish. This meal reminded families of fishing trips, coastal traditions, and the joy of bringing fresh catch straight from net to skillet. Fried mullet with hush puppies honored African-American ties to coastal communities and the creative spirit of cooks who turned fresh seafood and simple cornmeal into a feast worth waking up early for. Sliced tomatoes with salt and pepper on buttered toast became Thanksgiving morning freshness that brightened heavy breakfast plates with simple elegance and thoughtful care. Ripe tomatoes from late harvest or final market purchases were sliced thick and layered carefully on buttered toast, then seasoned simply with coarse salt and freshly ground black pepper that enhanced natural flavor. The tomatoes' juice soaked into the bread, while the butter added richness that balanced the acidity perfectly, creating harmony on the plate. This breakfast provided vitamins and moisture, balancing richer dishes like sausage and eggs that otherwise dominated morning tables with their heaviness. Grandmothers included it when they wanted something light and refreshing before the heavy dinner that would come later in the day. Children might have preferred sweeter options initially, but learned to appreciate fresh vegetables as proper breakfast food worth enjoying. Butter-fried cornbread slices were the kind of breakfast that made you sit up a little straighter just from the smell alone. Leftover cornbread never went to waste, especially not when a skillet and a bit of butter could transform it into something golden, crisp, and wonderfully indulgent. Grandparents sliced the cornbread thick, letting the butter melt across the hot pan before laying each piece down to brown. The edges crisped quickly, creating a contrast to the soft center that felt almost like cake without the sweetness. Some families ate it plain, others added syrup or honey, and some sprinkled sugar over the top, but every version tasted rich and deeply satisfying. This was breakfast that reminded you of cast-iron skillets, warm kitchens, and mornings that started long before the sun rose high. Butter-fried cornbread slices were a way to stretch yesterday's food into today's comfort. Grapefruit with sugar and a broiled topping was the picture of mid-century sophistication, elegant yet born of practicality. Halved grapefruit was sprinkled with sugar and broiled just long enough for the top to bubble and brown, creating a caramelized glaze that softened the tartness beneath. Served in its own rind with a little spoon, it looked like something from a hotel breakfast tray. Housewives loved it because it felt fancy but cost almost nothing. The heat mellowed the fruit, making it warm and fragrant, the sugar turning into a crisp, golden shell. It was light, refreshing, and surprisingly indulgent for something so simple. For a generation discovering convenience and presentation, this dish was breakfast theater. Grapefruit with sugar was more than fruit. It was optimism, the taste of a new kind of morning when simplicity could still feel special. Some families added a drizzle of honey or a sprinkle of cinnamon for extra warmth, while others topped it with a cherry for flair. It became a symbol of modern homemaking, polished, easy, and delightful to the eye. The broiled grapefruit was as much about beauty as flavor, proof that even the simplest fruit could feel luxurious when given a moment of care. Lard-fried corn pones were the kind of breakfast that stuck to your ribs and carried you through long hours of work or school. These dense corn patties were mixed from cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt before being fried golden in sizzling lard. The flavor was simple but deeply satisfying, with the crisp edges giving way to a soft interior that felt hearty in every bite. For families with little to spare, corn pones were portable and cheap, making them an everyday staple as well as a meal to take out into the fields. Children often carried them wrapped in cloth, while adults relied on them with strong coffee to start their mornings. They were versatile too, eaten plain, dipped in molasses, or even crumbled into buttermilk for a different kind of breakfast. Lard-fried corn pones were never fancy, but they were dependable, and that made them unforgettable. They represented resourcefulness and strength, the kind of food that reflected both necessity and comfort in kitchens where nothing went to waste. Oatmeal with evaporated milk made plain oats taste like luxury. Grandparents boiled the oats slow, stirring with patience until thick and creamy. A splash of evaporated milk turned it rich, giving it sweetness and body even without sugar. Sometimes a little butter melted in, swirling gold into gray. The smell was gentle, warm, milky, and kind. It filled hungry bellies and comforted tired hearts, especially on cold mornings when heat was scarce. The milk, thick and silky from the can, gave the oatmeal a flavor that felt indulgent in a time when little else was. Kids didn't always know it was a cheaper meal. They just knew it tasted good. For families who had to stretch every dollar, oatmeal with evaporated milk was proof that care mattered more than cost. Each spoonful was slow and satisfying, carrying love in every bite. It was breakfast made to last, and to remind you that small comforts could still feel grand. Country sausage and red pepper gravy turned ordinary biscuits into a feast, combining smoky pork with the sweetness of peppers and onions. Sausage browned slowly in a heavy skillet, releasing drippings that formed the base of a creamy gravy thickened with flour and milk. Strips of red bell pepper and chopped onions simmered in the mixture, lending a vibrant color and a subtle sweetness that balanced the savory richness. Poured over split biscuits or spooned onto grits, the gravy soaked into every layer, ensuring each bite was flavorful and filling. In African American kitchens of the 1970s, this dish represented comfort and abundance, a way to stretch a small amount of meat into a meal for the entire family. Some cooks added a touch of crushed red pepper for gentle heat, while others served sliced tomatoes alongside for freshness. Country sausage and red pepper gravy brought together bold taste and home-style satisfaction, making mornings feel special even on the busiest days. Fried potato cakes made from leftover mashed potatoes became Thanksgiving morning crispy treats that children begged for. Grandmothers mixed cold mashed potatoes with beaten eggs, chopped onions, and flour, forming patties that fried until golden brown and crusty. The outside turned crispy while the inside stayed soft and fluffy. These cakes used potatoes left from testing recipes or from earlier preparations. Served with butter or gravy, they provided filling breakfast that cost virtually nothing. In Black households where waste was never acceptable, fried potato cakes represented culinary intelligence. Children ate them hot off the skillet, burning their fingers but too eager to wait. Adults enjoyed them with coffee, appreciating how yesterday's side dish became today's featured breakfast. The cakes could be made quickly, freeing grandmothers to focus on dinner. Fried potato cakes proved resourcefulness could transform leftovers. Country sausage patties with cane syrup were a sweet and savory breakfast that carried the flavor of Southern tradition. Grandparents often made sausage from scratch or bought it fresh, shaping it into patties with practiced hands. The patties sizzled in the skillet, filling the house with a smell that meant the day was off to a strong start. Once cooked, they were served alongside cane syrup, thick and dark, ready for dipping or drizzling. The combination of salty sausage and sweet syrup created a harmony that felt indulgent even when the ingredients were simple. It stuck to your ribs, kept you full, and tasted like a morning wrapped in warmth. Cane syrup was cheaper and easier to find than maple syrup, but it had a bold flavor all its own. Families passed down the preference across generations, pairing it with biscuits, sausage, and sometimes even eggs. Country sausage patties with cane syrup were more than breakfast. They were the memory of Sunday mornings, crowded tables, and laughter rising like steam from the skillet. Molasses on hot biscuits was the taste of sweetness earned through patience. When sugar was expensive or hard to find, molasses filled the gap, dark, thick, and full of depth. Hot biscuits came out of the oven steaming, split open by hand, and dripping with butter before a spoonful of molasses turned them into something heavenly. The syrup pooled and soaked into the soft crumb, leaving behind a shine that caught the morning light. It was sticky on the fingers, rich on the tongue, and comforting in a way only handmade food can be. For many, it was the only sweet treat of the day, but that never made it ordinary. The flavor was bold, smoky, and deep. A reminder of cane fields, wood stoves, and family hands passing down recipes without a word written. Molasses on biscuits was the kind of breakfast that could make even the hardest morning feel gentle again. In the simplest kitchens, where nothing was wasted and every crumb mattered, this pairing stood as a small luxury, proof that joy could come from the humblest of ingredients. Cracklin' cornbread was a dish that brought a little joy and extra nourishment to the table, especially during times of struggle. Made by folding pork cracklings into traditional cornbread batter, it added both protein and crunch to a meal that was usually simple. Pork skins and fat were cheap and rarely wasted, and incorporating them into cornbread gave households a way to make breakfast more sustaining. Served hot from the skillet, cracklin' cornbread was filling enough to carry families through demanding days. It became a staple for marches, farm work, or long hours in factories, offering both flavor and strength. Children remembered the satisfying crunch, while adults valued the resourcefulness that turned scraps into sustenance. Cracklin' cornbread reflected a deeper story about resilience, showing how families took pride in making the most of what they had. More than just food, it symbolized unity at the table and fuel for the struggles ahead, keeping spirits alive through its warmth and heartiness. Fried bologna and eggs were the kind of breakfast that came from both love and necessity. The skillet hit the stove before the sun came up, its heat waking the house faster than any clock could. Grandparents sliced slits in the edges of the bologna so it would not curl, laying each piece flat to sizzle in the pan. The smell was sharp and smoky, filling the kitchen with a promise that no one would start the day hungry. Once browned and blistered at the edges, the bologna came out and the eggs went in, frying in the same grease for flavor that no oil could match. Some mornings they scrambled them with onions. Other days they fried them hard with crisp edges. Served on white bread or next to grits, it was a meal that filled stomachs and spirits alike. Kids called it breakfast meat, never thinking about how little it cost, just how good it tasted. It was a worker's breakfast, the kind that kept strength in the body and dignity in the home. The bologna might have come from a bargain pack, but when it hit that skillet, it turned into gold. It was not about luxury. It was about knowing how to make something small feel mighty. The sound of grease popping was a morning song, one that told you life might be hard, but you would always eat. Biscuits with sorghum syrup and butter were Thanksgiving morning luxury made affordable through grandmother's baking skills and pantry staples. The biscuits were made from scratch using flour, lard, buttermilk, and baking powder, rolled out and cut with drinking glasses before being baked until golden. Sorghum syrup, cheaper than maple and more flavorful than corn syrup, was drizzled generously over split biscuits slathered with butter. The combination created flavors that felt indulgent, though the cost was minimal. Black families treasured sorghum because it connected them to Southern farming traditions and provided sweetness during hard times. Grandmothers kept large tins of sorghum in pantries, knowing it would last months. Thanksgiving morning biscuits were made fresh, still warm when served. Children ate them eagerly, syrup dripping down their chins. Adults savored them slowly, appreciating the craftsmanship required for perfect biscuits. Banana pecan. Quick bread filled homes with the warm fragrance of ripe fruit and toasted nuts, offering a moist and hearty slice that worked as both breakfast and snack. Overripe bananas were mashed into a batter of flour, butter, and eggs, ensuring natural sweetness and tender texture. Chopped pecans folded through the mixture added a gentle crunch and a rich, nutty flavor that deepened as the loaf baked. Some families added a splash of vanilla or a pinch of cinnamon for extra aroma, while others left the recipe pure and simple. Sliced thick and served warm with a pat of butter, banana pecan quick bread made busy mornings feel a little more indulgent without requiring elaborate preparation. It became a beloved treat in African American kitchens, where thrift and flavor often went hand in hand. This bread proved that everyday ingredients, when combined with care, could produce a breakfast that felt special and comforting, filling kitchens with the scent of love and tradition. Cornbread and buttermilk was breakfast born of simplicity and strength. Grandparents crumbled leftover cornbread into bowls, poured cold buttermilk over the top, and stirred until soft and thick. It was tangy, creamy, and filling, the perfect meal when cupboards were bare. The sourness of the buttermilk balanced the sweetness of the bread, making each bite taste new again. It was food that cooled the body in summer, soothed it in winter, and satisfied hunger all year long. No stove, no fuss, just ingredients that were always on hand. It was eaten with a spoon, quiet and steady, often in the same bowls used for supper. There was nothing fancy about it, but it carried the wisdom of generations: never waste, never want. It was a poor person's breakfast, yes, but one made with pride. Some folks added a pinch of salt or a drizzle of syrup, but it never needed more than it had. The clinking of spoons and the sound of quiet chewing told stories of endurance and contentment. In a world that asked for more, this humble meal taught gratitude for what was already there. Cornmeal dumplings in milk were a dish that blended simplicity with comfort, making them a favorite in many households when mornings were cold and food was scarce. Dumplings were mixed from cornmeal and flour, shaped into small rounds, and simmered in sweetened milk until soft and tender. The result was both filling and slightly sweet, a dish that could serve as either breakfast or dessert depending on how it was prepared. For families with children, it was often given in the morning to ensure they had energy for school. Adults relied on it as well, especially when more costly staples like bacon or sausage were unavailable. Cornmeal dumplings in milk carried a sense of warmth and security, proof that even the humblest ingredients could create satisfaction. It was a dish remembered not only for its flavor, but for the way it stretched supplies in hard times. It became part of the rhythm of survival, tying family memories to the shared strength of the table. Homemade buttermilk pancakes were a weekend ritual that stretched across generations. Before box mixes, families mixed their own batter: flour, eggs, buttermilk, and a pinch of soda for lift. The griddle hissed as each ladleful hit the heat, bubbling and browning into golden perfection. They came off in stacks, soft in the center, crisp at the edges, ready for butter and syrup or sometimes just sugar sprinkled on top. Buttermilk gave them their signature tang, the secret that made them taste like home. Mothers and grandmothers flipped them by instinct, never measuring, always knowing by sight when they were done. These pancakes were meant to be shared, piled high in the middle of the table for everyone to grab. They were a reminder that joy could come cheap, that breakfast could be a celebration all on its own. In a world before hurry, this was how mornings were meant to feel. Fried chicken necks for breakfast were a testament to how nothing was wasted in older kitchens, especially in families that understood the value of every part of the bird. Chicken necks were seasoned, dredged, and fried just like larger cuts, producing crisp skin and tender meat that pulled away easily. Grandparents cooked them with a practiced hand, turning a frugal piece of meat into a flavorful start to the morning. Served alongside biscuits, grits, or even eaten alone, they tasted rich, savory, and far more satisfying than their humble appearance suggested. For children, it was a breakfast full of flavor and adventure, a reminder that good food did not have to be fancy or expensive. Fried chicken necks were a celebration of resourcefulness, tradition, and respect for the animal that fed the family. Apple butter toast was the kind of breakfast that came with a story. Thick, spiced apple butter spread over warm toast turned ordinary mornings into something memorable. The butter's deep brown color came from hours of slow cooking. Apples simmered with sugar, cinnamon, and cloves until they transformed into a smooth, fragrant paste. Grandparents often made it in big batches, filling jars to last through winter. Each spoonful carried the patience of a day spent stirring at the stove. On cold mornings, that same spread met the crackle of toast, melting slightly into the crumb, releasing a scent that filled the whole kitchen. It was sweet but grounded, rich but not heavy, the taste of comfort that lasted long after the meal was done. Apple butter toast wasn't about extravagance. It was about preservation, tradition, and the art of making something beautiful from what you grew. Fried bologna biscuits were the kind of breakfast that made you feel like you were getting something special even when money was tight. Grandparents would slice thick rounds of bologna and lay them into a popping skillet, letting the edges curl and brown until the flavor deepened into something smoky and rich. The hot slices were tucked into fresh biscuits, often homemade or leftover from the night before, absorbing just enough of the bologna's warmth to soften perfectly. It was salty, savory, and incredibly satisfying, the kind of handheld breakfast that felt almost luxurious despite coming from inexpensive ingredients. Children loved the way the biscuit crumbled slightly with each bite, mixing with the bold taste of the fried bologna. Adults appreciated how easy it was to make and how far it could stretch the budget. This was the kind of food that reminded families that good meals did not need fancy ingredients or long cooking times. All they needed was a skillet, some biscuits, and someone who knew how to make simple food feel unforgettable. Cold fried chicken leftovers were proof that good food never needed to be reheated to be loved. The night before, it was a Sunday feast, fried golden and eaten hot. By morning, it was breakfast straight from the icebox. The crust lost its crunch, but gained a flavor all its own, peppery, savory, and soaked with memories of yesterday's dinner. Paired with a biscuit or just eaten with bare fingers, it was a quiet pleasure before the day's work began. There was no ceremony to it, no fuss, just the understanding that fried chicken was too good to waste. In farm kitchens where every meal counted, leftovers became luxury. Cold chicken tasted of thrift, of gratitude, of knowing how to make joy last. Some folks swore it tasted even better that way, seasoned twice, once by the skillet and once by time. It was food you did not rush, food that let the morning feel unhurried. Homemade apple butter toast was a breakfast that stretched the fruits of summer into the long months of winter. Families would cook apples down with spices until they formed a thick, sweet spread, preserving it in jars for the cold seasons. Spread over stale bread, biscuits, or cornbread, apple butter transformed plain staples into something comforting. It was a way of saving harvests, ensuring that fruit could be enjoyed long after the orchards were bare. Apple butter toast was often served to children before school, giving them a sense of sweetness and strength in the mornings. Adults valued it for its practicality. as a single jar could last weeks and provide flavor to otherwise bland meals. It was not just a spread, but a memory of orchards, harvest work, and the determination to make food last. Apple butter toast became a symbol of both survival and warmth, offering families a taste of sweetness during hard times. Sweet potato biscuits brought sunshine into the morning, their golden color glowing like joy itself. Grandparents mashed leftover sweet potatoes into flour, sugar, and a bit of lard, turning scraps into softness. The dough came together with care, rolled out and cut by hand before baking to perfection. The smell that drifted from the oven was sweet, nutty, and full of promise. When pulled apart, the biscuits were tender and bright, sweetened naturally by the potato. No jam was needed, just warmth, butter if it was there, and the pride of making something beautiful from leftovers. Kids would eat them fast, the edges still too hot to touch. It was breakfast that felt like celebration, even on the poorest days. Every bite reminded the family that sweetness could grow from hardship, that nothing given by the earth ever went to waste. The color of the biscuits looked like morning sunlight captured in bread form, glowing against the gray of lean years. Every soft bite spoke of love and cleverness, proof that even scraps could bloom into something whole. It was a kind of quiet victory, one baked, not bought, and shared with joy. Which African-American breakfast would you revive in your kitchen? Share your morning memories in the comments below, hit the like button, and subscribe so we can keep these forgotten traditions alive together.